Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Josh.
And this is NFGeeks. All right, Josh, you want to talk about a topic that has always been very fascinating to me, and much of my education sort of threads through this, and that is the idea of religion, and particularly religion in America. America being a religious nation. I mean, there's obviously secularism going on, but huge parts of America are very religious. So why don't you start it off? What were some of your concerns you were discussing at supper?
Well, with recently with like the passing of Easter, you know, there's like every Easter, you know, you have family gathering, and like on TV, there's all these movies, the Ten Commandments and the King of Kings, and all these movies.
I love the Ten Commandments. That's one of my favorite movies.
But like through that, I got into a discussion with my stepmom earlier in the day, and then with my stepfather later in the day. And this video is going to be a lot about ignorance towards and within religion, specifically Christianity.
Okay. On both sides, like the atheist side and the religious side, or like where?
Yeah, both, on both.
Okay.
Because
Josh has a lot to say.
Because neither one understands what's actually happening.
No, that's
and it's
true.
a problem.
Well, in fact, one of the issues I have with both the version of Christianity that exists now in America and atheism is that they take a very literal, concrete position. The Christian point of view is that this absolutely happened. There's no other way to look at it. But the atheist position is the same thing. This absolutely didn't happen, and there's no other way to look at it.
Right.
You know, so it's this rigidity on both sides.
And to be honest, both of you are absolutely wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's such a thing as metaphors. Okay.
Right.
You have to be an NF.
That's the whole thing, is like, especially with like, because my stepmom's an evangelist, and they're all about like studying Jesus. Well, you should have known that Jesus spoke in parables, because if you know anything about history, in the time period when you practice unorthodox religions, they kill you. So he spoke in parables or riddles. So everything that he says, the way it's written, doesn't actually mean what you think it means all the time.
Yeah, there's actually a whole religious theological and religious studies position that deconstructs the parables in that way. All right, so I want you to tell the story a little bit about what happened on Easter, because this was kind of comical when you were telling us.
Okay, so we were talking about, it started off by, we were talking about the series, the Bible, that's been giving on the History Channel. And we were only talking about it because the guy who plays Jesus is Portuguese, so we were all super psyched about it. And so then we're talking about that, and I'm talking about how I like the graphics, and I'm saying, like, because especially in the first two episodes, it's all Old Testament stuff, and all the cool stuff happens in the Old Testament, like all the crazy, like the bush is on fire, and the sea splits and kills all the Egyptians, like all the awesome shit happens in the Old Testament.
Elijah, right.
Yeah, so all like the cool graphic stuff is in the first two episodes, basically. So then she gets talking about stories of the Old Testament, and how she's like, well, yeah, and then Abraham, you know, he's 900, and I'm like, well, yeah, but like Abraham didn't really live to be 900. And she's like, well, what do you mean? Of course he was. And I was like, you really think Abraham died at the age of 900? Even though scientific fact states that human cells only have a lifespan of 120 years, you think Abraham lived to be 900?
Not only that, imagine the average lifespan at 2000 BC. And
right, it was like
30.
Yeah, like the average person lived to be 30, but Abraham, fuck it, 900. And then I'm like, you really? And her explanation was, well, you obviously have no faith in God, because if you did, you'd believe that anything is possible. And if God wants you to live to be 900, you'll be 900. And if he doesn't, then you won't. And I'm like, and you're a moron, because you don't understand. Because my whole thing about it is like, people read it, but they just take it for face value, and they don't want to like. People are readers and not theologians. They don't want to. They don't want to read the text and study it, because the whole point about the Bible is, my problem with people is that they don't understand that, both with believers and non-believers, they don't understand that it's not a science book, it's not a textbook, it's a guidebook. It's supposed to be something. It's kind of like reading folk tales to your kids. A rabbit didn't really race a turtle. You tell the story because you want your kids to learn a lesson. You want them to learn, don't underestimate people. Don't, stop, don't give up. Don't stop working hard.
Yeah.
That's the point of the tortoise and the hare. The point of the Bible is for you to read the stories, learn the lesson, and then take the lesson and make yourself a better person. That's the point of the Bible. Whether you think it happened or it didn't, that's the point. And that's why people misinterpret it and misinterpret religion and take it completely wrong because they don't understand the purpose of the book or anything surrounding it.
Well, that's interesting. You talk about this because one of the things that crossed my humanities graduate experience was something called scholarly criticism of scripture, obviously. And there's two types. One is called textual criticism, and that's when you take a document and you compare the language to language of a specific time period to see if it matches. So it would be like the equivalent of like finding a document that said LMAO and then trying to figure out what decade did that go to. You wouldn't put it in 1980,
right?
Because that didn't exist. That kind of thing, and that tells you like, okay, was this really written at a certain time? For example, like they always put the Pentateuch, the Torah with Moses, but really the language is much more 500 BC, that kind of thing.
Right.
And another one's called source criticism, where you try to find the source of the document. So you have this document, but what was the edited document before that? What was the draft before that? Where was the draft before that? So there's in scholarship on religious studies, they don't take this face value. Moses wrote the Torah at 1200 BC or whatever.
Right.
They do this criticism.
And that's like another problem is that like people will be like, well, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were his apostles and they wrote the books. They didn't write the books. All the apostles were like fishermen and sheep herders and craftsmen.
And illiterate.
Illiterate. They didn't know how to read and write.
Right.
Maybe like 2 of them did.
Yeah, and even Paul, who knew how to write, if you read the epistles, he always talks about the writer of it, which is usually Timothy. Like some other guy is actually literally doing the writing. He's just sort of, like dictating.
Dictating to like a scribe or something.
Well, I wanted to talk about this. When I went and got my practitioner certification in Myers-Briggs, I met, and this may be surprising, an ENTP minister, okay, but he was from Texas, so I should tell you something. But he was a very good guy, and he told me that, the Gospels follow the temperaments in Myers-Briggs, and that's why they're universal. If you look at it, each Gospel represents a temperament. So, for example, Mark represents the SPs. It's quick, gets right to the point, boom. Matthew is SJ, because it's all about how the law in the past is being reinforced through Jesus.
Yeah.
Luke is the NT because it goes through this huge, long explanation of how this works and what happened and this sort of history. And John, which is all metaphors and crazy shit, that's the NF.
Right.
That's our gospel.
That's for us.
Yes, it is. So that's I might have said that in the other video, but that relates to what we're talking about today. All right, let's talk about let's get on to the atheist side for a minute. Because you have issues with them too, or you're not happy with them.
Right.
So what's your beef with the atheists?
Well, it's kind of like what I was saying about the whole like fairy tale. You tell fairy tales and stories to learn a lesson, and that's the point of the Bible. The Bible's not. I mean, first of all, like, am I saying all of these things happen or that they happen exactly the way they happen? No, I'm not. But to say that everything was improbable isn't very. You can't claim that either because like the time periods check out. Like there's historical cross references. Like the Romans enslaved the Jews at this time. The Jews were under Egyptian rule at this time. So stuff checks out. Like it's not like everything.
The 10 tribes were destroyed. 700. Like the Assyrians have records of that.
Yeah. So like not everything's bullshit. Like this, some stuff is real. Some stuff happened. But like, am I saying that like? Jesus walked on water? No, not necessarily. I mean, stories get embellished all the time. I mean, people watching this video right now have embellished stories that happened to them 2 weeks ago. So, of course, these, 60-year-old men are going to embellish a story about Jesus, especially when they're telling it 50 years after it happened.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Or they're specifically trying to make a metaphor out of the story. I was just saying around Easter, my own conversation was, and see, that nobody rebelled against me, but nobody got it. So it was in the middle, is that the purpose of Easter, even Christianity, is a metaphor for transcendence through suffering. That through suffering and losing the self, you transcend the self and you transcend into something more than yourself, and that's the whole metaphor of the resurrection. Whether Jesus actually resurrected or not is not, you're never going to get to the bottom of that.
But that's
no
not
matter
the
what.
point.
That isn't the point, that's right. That's not the point. So whether you're an atheist or a religious person, that's not the point. The point is the metaphor
Right.
of transformation through suffering.
And that's with any story. It's the metaphor, the lesson. That's the point. And you're supposed to use that to better
Right.
yourself. It's not for you to.
And so your point is that the atheists are also missing that
Right.
as well.
They're trying to say, well, this isn't true because this didn't happen. There's no record of a Jesus and blah 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 blah. They're trying to break it down and make everything technical, but it's not. It's not what it's for. It's not a science book. You know what I mean?
And actually, speaking of the Old Testament, you're talking about the historical crossover, and what makes the Old Testament interesting, and it's actually the Jews, Judah that survived, is that the Bible isn't history; it's history interpretation. They're trying
Right.
to say this is how this progressed and why. And obviously, they put God and morality in that, but it's not a recording of facts. It's a history theory. It's actually the first historical theory of why history unfolds the way it does.
Right.
And that's a good thing, fascinating.
And talking about that, like my mom, who's probably like the least like educated person in the room, made a really good. No, not to offend her, but she didn't really like. She went to school in Portugal, and like at her time, the schooling wasn't great. But like, she made like the best point. She was like, because they said, well, how do you know? My stepdad said, well, how do you know any of this is real? Because he believes in God, but he doesn't really believe in like religion or how the stories are told or whatever. So he's like, oh, how do you know any of this is real? And then she was like, well, were you alive during World War I? He's like, no. And then she's like, do you know anybody that was alive during World War One? And he was like, no. So then she was like, well, how the hell do you know World War One happened?
Yeah.
And then he was like, well, because it's written down. And she goes, well, so's the Bible, dumbass. And walked away. And I thought like that was like the best point made all day.
That's funny because sometimes in philosophy I'm talking about the limits of knowledge, like the
Right.
nominal and whatever. I always say like you don't know there was a Battle of Gettysburg.
Right.
You have no idea. Okay.
They say that
you read it, you saw it on the History Channel, but you didn't see it. And they'll say like, well, what about the cannonballs? Well, so what? Anybody could have put that there.
Right.
That's not knowledge. That's not absolute knowledge. You know.
Right.
All right. So what's your opinion? So you've had the criticism about the fundamentalists and criticism of the atheists. So and you mentioned that they're metaphors. Where do you stand on all of this? Whether it's belief in God or where are your leanings?
Well, yeah, I definitely believe in God, and I like to read like the Bible and other like religiously related scriptures, because like I said, I like to read them because I find it, I'm like a history person, so I find it interesting. And then, like I said, I think it is a useful tool for a person to better themselves and because I mean, if we all just they kind of just say fuck it, the world's not really going to be that great of a place. And I'm not saying being religious makes you a good person or not, but it's certainly a useful tool. There's certainly not anything detrimental necessarily that's going to come from you studying the Bible and trying to find something in it to make you better. You know what I'm saying? But that's also what I was saying about like the fundamentalists, is that they take it to like the negative point and they ruin it for everyone else. They make all Christians or religious people in general seem idiotic, and they make it seem like everyone has these stupid ideas when it's really only them.
Yeah, one of the things that I feel bad about America is that America, in light of its religious freedom, which isn't like anywhere else, it's one of the things we can be proud of, America could be having this amazing religious dialogue because there's not that kind of violence that goes on. And what's the worst that happens when people disagree at religion between Christianity? You can't come to the bake sale.
Right.
That's it. That's the worst. No, you can't come. I'm not selling you the cookies. There could be this amazing dialogue, and there's not.
Right.
At all.
And
at
people,
all.
And the thing, one thing that like really bothers me is when people are misinformed and they speak like they know what they're talking about. There's probably nothing in the world that aggravates me more. Like another thing was we started talking about like Jews, and I said something like, well, Jews really, Jesus isn't their Messiah because they don't care. They don't believe in heaven or hell. If they did, they'd be Christians, not Jews. They don't care about heaven or hell. And
they don't.
She goes, what do you mean? Of course they care about heaven and hell. What do you think they do all the things for? And I said, because they do all the things. They follow the Jewish law because they get punished or gifted in real time.
Yeah,
Everything
absolutely.
happens right now. If you're good, God gives you
Right.
shit. If you're not, he fucking
God
kills you.
punishes Israel in real time.
In real time.
Yeah.
They don't believe that they're going to go to heaven or hell. They die and then their body waits for the kingdom of Israel on earth. It's like a physical thing. It's not some place that they're going to go to.
Right. That's one of the things that actually was mind-blowing about Jesus when he said the kingdom of God is at hand. He's talking about a metaphysical, idealized way of living. He's not literally talking about a literal nation coming up. All right, so we got 1 minute left. So what do you have to say, Josh? What's the last word you want to get on this issue?
Christians, learn your shit.
Oh,
please.
Boy. There's going to be a ton of comments on this one.
Because you think you know your shit, but you don't. Sorry, but you're obviously, some of you do, but most of you don't. You think you do, but you don't. And atheists, stop being jerks all the time. Because it's rude.
Yeah.
We don't tell you you're stupid because you think about fucking chemical reactions and bubbles and shit and metal going together all the damn time. So stop being rude to everyone else, okay?
Yeah, stop trolling.
Yeah.
It's not nice.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you, Josh. That was very fascinating. The comments are going to be with vitriol, I'm sure.
There'll be a part 2 someday.
Yeah, to respond to everything. All right, so thank you very much, Josh.